Welcome to the Wally Report. Welcome, everybody, to the first groundbreaking episode of the Wally Report. Listen, there's been much anticipation. We've been getting texted, emailed all over the place. There's clamoring in the streets. There's a lot of excitement around this, and we've finally today delivered. Okay. So let me introduce, the hosts here. My name is Ari Weiss, right? The main host of the show, and I'm your entertainment expert. And I got my co-host Christopher Devine, in a communications professional. How you doing, Christopher?
I'm doing great. Thank you. Thank you for having me. And you are indeed correct. I too have been getting text messages. I got a text message just moments before we began recording. When is it coming out? People want to know.
Exactly.
Well,
Yeah.
here it
So
is.
here it is, right? So let's just talk about our partnership, right? So we used to work together when we were in the luxury audio days, right? And so we had, similar excellent taste in a lot of things, whether it was music, film, television, right, fashion, and we had great banter, right? We had similar vocabulary and banter, and so that's why we thought we'd be perfect co-hosts for this show. Right. So let's get into what the heck the Wally Report is, because a lot of people, some people know, but a lot of people are now wondering, what is this show all about? Right. So it's an overarching entertainment show, right, that will be focusing on television, film, sports, and music, right? And so you'll hear more about this throughout the story, but from a young age, this is what I cared about. I was always into entertainment, whether it was in any of those four areas, especially music, sports, film, television as a kid, right? We're going to go back to that in a little bit, but through my life too, I was always involved in these areas through work, through whatever, through my interests, right? So, uh, then the genesis of the show, right? Why are we doing this? Is because coworkers, friends, family members were always contacting me as sort of your expert, if you will, in these spaces, and always bugging me about, hey, what's the next show that I should watch, right? So you could remember back in the office days, we would always have these conversations. People, and listen, I like talking about this. And now in the boom of podcasts, why not have a show about this, right? So, what we're going to do over the next year is primarily focus just on TV, even though we might come back to some of those other topics. This is the big pressing issue for us, and mostly what I get badgered about, right? So, for the next year, next 6 to 12 episodes, is going to be all about our TV show expertise, right? So, um, and so I did want to say before I go on, Christopher, how excited are you to be joining, this elite cast on the Waller Report and talking about these topics?
Well, I mean, this is an honor of a lifetime, Ari. And I mean, I couldn't imagine a better way to spend my time and a more enriching way. Um, I think one of the things that you and I have talked about is that really, I mean, the Wally Report is an entertainment podcast, yes, but you are offering a tremendous public service, and the contribution that you are making to the sort of collective dialogue about entertainment cannot be underestimated. You are helping people curate their lives, and you are helping people make decisions about how they spend their time. And time is the most valuable thing that we have, and people are turning to you. They have been for years. I used to,
Right.
and asking you, how should I invest my time? And you're here to provide some guidance to a much more widespread audience. So it's this is thrilling to be a part of. I couldn't be more delighted.
Well, very well said, right? And so that's kind of what we're doing. We're helping people curate their lives, right? And so the other part to it is not just, hey, we'll talk about the show structure in a second, but it's also It's also about navigating the streaming services, the logins, the bundles, the quality of shows. It's not like how it was 15 years ago when there was only a couple. And I'm going to get back to that concept there. In current day in 2024, it's very hard to figure out, how do I navigate all these streaming services, right? What are the best shows? How do I perfectly curate my time? And that's what this show will be giving you. So let's talk about show structure, just so the audience here, the growing audience, right? Uh, so they know what to expect. So it's going to be a monthly podcast to start, where we come on and basically I unveil the top 5 best shows in the world, and then I give you a little summary description. There won't be spoilers, but I'll give you little hints, and I'll at least talk about what's going on in these shows, the theme of the shows, the style of the shows, right? I'll also have you come on. You don't always have to come on with the top 5, but even if you have a one or two to add, we can argue, we can agree, we can debate. And then again, if this becomes very popular, because I do have a feeling that by episode 3, we're probably going to already have somewhat of around a million subscribers, you would imagine, right? So they might be begging for more episodes. And so I also have an all-time top 100 list. So we could have other episodes going along with the standard monthly top 5, but other episodes of doing countdowns of all-time shows. Okay? So
We have
just so
a huge pipeline of content is
right.
really what you're saying. Endless.
Exactly. Exactly. Um and one thing, to then note is that we also will have guests. So it won't just always be us, even though I'm sure that the masses are loving us so far. We will have celebrity guests. We will have actors, writers, directors, musicians. We'll invite them to come in, and then hopefully be able to talk and give insights about either the shows that are on my list, or just maybe other great shows of all time, right? Because we want to hear of those. We're not industry experts, exactly. We haven't worked in the business a lot, so I'd love to get amazing insights from some of those people, what it was like working with a certain director or a certain actor or a certain director of photography, things like that, right? When did you first get that script? Was there buzz around it? Did you think the show was going to be amazing? And that kind of thing, right? So we already actually have, and I'm not going to unveil it today, but we already have our first pretty well-known guest that will probably be coming in on episode 3. So look out for that. So yeah, Christopher, I know you wanted me to talk about my background before we got into the rankings, correct?
Yeah, I think, and you mentioned this right at the outset, but I think it's really worth delving into. Can you tell us a little bit more about how television became such an important part of your life? Because I think for a lot of people, television is just there, right? And people watch TV, and some people, become very attached to shows, but your relationship with television differs from most people's relationship with television, and it's really, I mean, it's something you take very seriously, and I want you to share with everyone how this came to be.
Yeah, so I mentioned it a little bit before, but I think at a very young age, I was always sort of an entertainment nut. I think it was just the magic of it. So as soon as I was old enough to understand what movies were, what television, what sports, right, music, and maybe it was because I grew up in rural Vermont, which during the winter months can be very long and boring, right? So I needed an escape from this wintry, desolate land. Okay. And so I would watch, as soon as I was old enough, I would watch movies, and I just, couldn't believe the magic and the marvel that they sort of give you. And I was an escape artist, right? I think then segueing into my teenage years, it's like I would see a lot of movies, and I would sort of, daydream about these other amazing places that I wanted to travel to or to visit, right? And then let's talk about TVs particularly. So in the 80s, 90s, we all watch TV, right? I know different people, our viewers might be from different generations. We're from a similar generation. But it was mostly sitcoms, right? You didn't think of TV as sort of like high quality, Oscar worthy film type content, right? So I was more of a film kid, but I love TV, but I didn't think of it as the same, except maybe for a Twin Peaks. I'm sure there's going to be viewers that are going to come on, they're going to argue, and they're going to say, what about in the 80s? There was these other, shows that maybe I
MASH. What
um,
about MASH?
yeah, I mean, I just don't know if that had critical acclaim. I guess it did, but we could have other people come on and argue that, right? So the other thing too is at in that era, I don't think you saw actors really going back and forth from TV and film that much, right? We talked about this before in a side conversation where some actors it would start TV and once you graduated to film, I don't think you came back. Maybe there was a few, and maybe I'm just generalizing, but I think that was sort of the the world, right, that we
I
are
think the
living in.
best
So,
example of that is, or one of the best examples of that is George Clooney, who started
mm,
as a cast member on ER, the show about the
yeah,
Cook County Hospital in Chicago. And then, as that sort of served as a launch pad for his career, and then he started making film, and then you didn't see him in TV shows again. I mean, he couldn't be bothered, right?
right. Yeah, totally. It's a great point. And the funny thing is, and I don't know if you know this, but I also at one point got to work with Clooney. I was his office production assistant for a movie called Good Night and Good Luck, which actually was up for an Oscar about Edward R. Murrow.
I did not know
Did you?
that, but I have seen that movie.
Yeah,
It's a great movie.
you have seen that? Yeah, I
Oh
was. So
yeah,
I was your office production assistant. Major role. Major role. I think I had an IMDb because of it at that one point. I'll go back. I'll tell you some good Clooney stories at one point. So, yeah. So I think there was that phenomenon, right? So now I got to say, as I got to my later teens, right? Um, there was a major drop off for me. I think Seinfeld was probably my last hurrah, and then maybe into the beginning of Friends, and then I got a little bit older. So for me, from the late '90s into the early 2000s, TV was out. It was either film, it was either sports, or it was partying and going out. I didn't have To me, TV seemed very like you're a kid or you're middle America family that's tuning in for Thursday night. You couldn't really have this high level of quality content because now you have commercials, you can't swear, there's a lot of things, you're restricted on television. So I basically completely wrote off the format or the medium, if you will. Okay. However, at the same time, in the late 90s, okay, and this is very interesting, this is our first big historical concept that we're going to talk through here. There, at the same time as I was stepping away from it, there was this new HBO TV boom. Okay. So let's talk about a couple years here. Sex in the City, 1998. Sopranos, 1999. Curb Special was 1999, which you have to watch because I think you said you have never seen the original special. The
I've
show
not.
starts in 2000. It's unbelievable. It
Is
sets
it
the
just a
stage
one?
for the show.
Is it just like a 30-minute special, 1 hour
It's an
special?
hour. I think it's an hour or hour and a half special following Larry around, and it sort of was the genesis of Curb because it got it was like they were like, oh wait, this is actually really good. We should do a show based on this. And then 6 Feet Under, 2001. Okay. I was not aware of this change. I'm going to be the first one to admit, and I'll tell you, I didn't probably come back into this realm till probably '04. I missed all this. Okay. But what had just happened was now the world has been changed forever. We are now introduced to film quality content, but in TV format. Okay. So I think this is the big change that is, like you could say, this is a societal shift as a well read fellow like you might say, right? Now, what has happened here? Okay. So you're now, again, repeating myself, you're getting amazing high quality content, but now I can tell my story in 10 hours versus an hour and a half or something like that. So before I go on to my next comment, I just want to pause. Did you were you already watching some of these shows right in 98, 99, 2000s, or did you also take a couple years before you noticed what was going on?
Yeah, so I'm always, when it comes to television shows, I'm always a few years behind, even to this day. And I'll talk more about why that is later. I sort of like other folks like you to do the research for me, um, and I also like seasons of shows to accumulate,
Mm,
so I can
right.
really, go deep into a show. Um, but but back in the late 90s, early 2000s, I just wasn't really tuned into this sort of renaissance. I think there's no other
Mm,
word for it other than renaissance that in television that you were describing. I do remember, though, when I was a senior in high school, going to my girlfriend's house, and her sisters were all sitting around watching Sex in the City, and that was my sort of first exposure to
okay.
this brave new world, we can call it. Uh, and and then when I was in college, I started kind of watching Sex in the City casually, and by the time I graduated, it was actually my senior year. I watched every single episode. So Sex in the City was
Mm,
the first show that of which I watched every episode. However, it took me a while to sort of really kind of become fully invested in um, this type of programming, and
mm,
also to really understand and appreciate how different it was and how revolutionary it was. I think only now in retrospect do I realize, and it's really helpful to kind of go through this chronology that you've just walked us through. Only now do I realize what a significant sort of pivot in entertainment, in home entertainment, the late 90s, early 2000s were. Um, but for me, it wasn't something that caught on immediately. It wasn't until, maybe a few years after I graduated college, that I really started kind of delving into shows. And there were also network shows that I and we could talk a little bit about network shows, but like The West Wing, for example, was a show that I really became invested in. But in every case, I was renting these or buying these on DVD and watching them after the fact, right?
got it.
I wasn't watching live, because you remember, I
Yeah.
mean, now, very few of these shows are aired live. And a lot of streaming services will dump 3 or 4 episodes at a time. But back then,
Yes.
even though we had this turning point, this is before streaming, so you still have to adhere to a weekly calendar. Sex in the City's on Thursday at 8 o'clock or whatever it was. I have no idea when it was. Um,
Yeah.
and so you have this new format, this new revolutionary format, but you don't have the same freedom back then that we do now, in terms of how and when you can consume all of this new content.
Got you. So you were actually ahead of me if you think about it, because if you were already doing Sex in the City, I'm trying to recount my memory. I think I told you this before in a different conversation. Was I remember during this period in the early 2000s, going to a few friends' house and seeing them, and they were all like came over to watch Sopranos, and I was a big partier then. I was not going to be sitting. I couldn't believe that they were doing that. I was like shocked. I'm like, maybe if it's a movie, sure, you have this big night plan, but not for a show. I couldn't believe they were doing this, and I think I saw a Curb episode early on, but it was just very strange, and I wasn't used to the what was going on. So but let me talk about TV versus film now. Okay, here's another concept that we need to get into. So what has happened that I didn't know, that unbeknownst to me, what now had happened. So to me, when you look at, and we're going to keep talking about this a lot today, but film now to me is too short to tell the proper story. Okay, if you only have an hour and a half, especially, how are you supposed to tell this story with great character development? It might work for just a silly little comedy or a cartoon or an action movie where it's not really whatever, it's just supposed to be that way. Great. But if you want a drama with amazing character development and and high end acting, and right, you want to be able to tell that story longer. So to me, right off the bat, TV slowly is now becoming the superior platform, right? Plus, the other thing is, if you fall in love with the world, I want to be immersed in that world for longer. I don't want just 1 hour and 45 minutes, and now I got to wait 5 years for the sequel to maybe come back to that world. I want it next week, baby. You
I
see
was
what I
gonna
mean? Like, so
say the exact same thing. You know, when there were movies that I would fall in love with, I mean, what do you do after the 2-hour movie is over? Well, you can watch it again. If it's a DVD, you can watch it with director commentary. You can watch all the extra stuff on the DVD, but it's not the same. The sort of immersion in that world is limited, greatly limited by time. And with these television shows that extend over 3, 4, 5, 6 seasons, each episode is an hour long. You don't have those limitations, and that's from a storytelling standpoint. I think it's an advantage, but also from the viewer standpoint, the consumer of the entertainment, it's an advantage because it allows you to really immerse yourself in this world, whatever that world may be.
yeah, so to me now, okay, when we look all that, TV is slowly, and I didn't even know this, but it's slowly becoming the superior platform. So now let me tell you my little Paramount story that we talked about, right? I need the listeners to hear. So I probably went all the way till about 2004. I'm working at Paramount Pictures as the casting assistant there for the casting director, which is a whole nother podcast if we want, right? Um, and I had an intern there. They watch a lot of crappy TV. They were talking about great film, and then they were telling me about reality TV, and I just was so shocked. I was like, "You guys watch that?" I just couldn't believe people were watching this kind of nonsense TV. Um, and this one intern kept saying, "Listen, there's this new show called Nip Tuck. You got to give it a shot. You're gonna like it." From your personality and the stuff you talk about, you're going to love this show. And I'm like, dude, I don't watch shows. TV's out. I only watch film. I don't know what you're talking about. And they kind of forced me by gunpoint. And literally, they gave me this old VHS that was like this weird screener because I think we were in this special office that had a couple episodes on. And I watched it, and boom, within 2 episodes, I was hooked. So and then I think my roommate at the time got me into The Shield, which was on FX, right? And so that's another thing. By the way, we are going to be bringing. Anytime we bring up a show, we're going to talk about what network or streaming service it was on. I have that kind of dialed in as we go along.
Was
So
Nip Tuck HBO? I'm trying to remember.
no, I feel like that was also FX, and I should have
Okay.
looked that up. We need to fact check that. I don't think that was HBO. I think it was an FX show, but it was fantastic, and it changed the whole directory of my content consumption. Right. So now let's continue on the path here. Okay. Dexter now comes out in 2006. And for me, then that changed everything. It went from, okay, TV is acceptable. I'm into it now to, wow, this is unbelievable. I'm now going out and renting these DVDs or getting these DVDs from Netflix. Right. And now we're going to segue. I'm going to list a bunch of into another period, which I deem the golden era of modern television. Okay. Mad Men, 2007, Breaking Bad, 2008, Boardwalk Empire, 2010. I'm also going to pause and make a little interjection here. At this time, I cite around 2010 to 2015 a major decay of film quality. Okay, so I got to do a little before I continue my list. I got to talk about this. So there's still some great movies that came out during this run. Okay, um, and I will even say when we ever go to my top 10 film list, there is some movies from this era. So I'm not saying it was all bad, but I think what really happened, especially 2015 on, it would just became a very money making formulaic system where movie going is all about the latest entertaining piece, whether it's comedy, horror, action, that just gets people into the theater on a Friday night, gets them to buy popcorn and forget about the hardships of work and to have fun. But it doesn't necessarily always mean it's high quality. And I remember there was a time period where I was dying to go to Blockbuster for the new releases. And then at this point, probably by 2015, if I even looked at iTunes, I would get pissed. That's how I felt. This whole new, I couldn't even believe that this was the state of modern film. So anyway, just we'll set that aside. But I just wanted to, as we were going through the timeline, I need the listener to understand that to me that was a big shift. Listen, there's probably still great independent movies, and there's great, you know, international movies and all this stuff like that, foreign films, obviously, that I'm sure film buffs would counter me here and they'd have a whole different narrative, but this is just my standard feelings here. Okay, let's get back to the show list. So again, Mad Men 2007, Breaking Bad 2008, Boardwalk Empire 2010, Game of Thrones 2011, Homeland 2011. I added this. House of Cards 2013. Now Netflix starts coming to play. Stranger Things 2016. And then I'm going to jump ahead all the way probably to the end. Queen's Gambit 2020. Okay? So let's pause here. What I have deemed this era, this 13-year run, is the golden age of modern television. Okay? If you just look at the titles, I mean, and I only just listed a few that I just picked. There are so many amazing titles from this time period, and each network just upping the ante, right? Not an era like nothing we've ever seen, is what I've been kind of saying. Okay. TV quality was brought to new unprecedented heights. The streaming revolution and is now taking hold. So if you think about 2007, there was just the early adopters of streaming. Then you get into the 2010, 2013, more regular everyday people understood, okay, how do I stream on Netflix? Do I have fast enough internet to do so? What's HBO Max, right? There was also just a handful of networks and providers. Netflix, HBO, Showtime, FX was still that one standard TV networks thriving, and then AMC. I'm going to give you AMC obviously for Breaking Bad and Mad Men. You have to have it on there, but there was just a handful of networks and streaming services. It was more, you could navigate this world a little bit easier. You could digest. Each network only had 2 or 3 or 4 really high quality shows a year, right? So that's why it was just much easier, I think, to navigate, and the quality was so high because it was just like this, you were going against, the competition was so stiff that if you wanted to make a new show that was going to go up for an Emmy, you were battling Breaking Bad. You were battling Boardwalk Empire. You had to come out with high quality stuff. Okay, so that's why I call that the golden era. Now, before I go on to my next thing, I want to say, did you realize at one point during this 13-year run that you were living in this amazing time period?
I think that I certainly appreciated it as time went by. I think it's very difficult when you're sort of in the midst of any kind of trend to fully understand what that trend means in the context of a broader history. But I definitely was reaping the benefits of of this trend. And by the way, you mentioned AMC because I was very into Mad Men. The only reason that AMC entered the picture is because HBO turned down Mad Men. And
Wow.
yeah, and so the creator of Mad Men, who had been a writer for The Sopranos, turned elsewhere, and
Mm.
that's what got AMC into the game, as it were. But I was definitely reaping the benefits, and what I was enjoying is exactly what we talked about a few minutes ago, was this sort of extended immersion into these really very well developed worlds. One of the things that I look for in a television show is really good art direction. And Mad Men is a great example of a show that has excellent art direction. I mean, every detail, down to the wood paneling in Don Draper's office, and the lamp on his desk. Um, and then there were, people who started writing blog entries about historical anachronisms in Mad Men. Well, they were using an IBM Selectric 2 typewriter instead of the Selectric 1, but the Selectric 2 didn't come out until the 1970s, and the show took place in 1959. Like, okay, I love that. Right. And so I also became kind of immersed in that culture as well. Right. The sort of I was entertained by the commentary on the entertainment. But when you're in the midst of a trend like that, it's really sort of difficult to appreciate what you have. It's only when that starts to deteriorate that you are able to look back and say, "Wow, that was really a magical time." And I think that's where this is headed. That after the Queen's Gambit, which I know you sort of mark as the end, or the beginning of the end of this magical run, we start to see the quality decline a little bit. You want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yes. So you kind of read my mind. And listen, we're still I mean, I still love, obviously television, and we're still doing this show now, maybe 5 years too late, but I do mark this as kind of the end of this golden. It doesn't mean that everything now is rubbish or something like that. Right. But this is what happened. So now, where I've deemed that the golden age, now there's the gold rush. Anywhere that there's something new that everybody is loving and there's attention to it and there's eyeballs on it, there's money involved. Okay. So all of a sudden, probably from 20, so let's talk about the final 5 years of this golden 2015 to 2020. Now more streaming services are showing up to the party. I'll get to that in a second. An explosion of new shows are now being created at a lightning pace because they know that's what people are doing now. Less people are going out. I mean, I'm sure there's still a lot of moviegoers, but now with this new golden age of streaming, I can get everything at home. And if I have a home theater, why am I going anywhere? Right. And then I think it was also now Netflix had created this binge culture. Netflix was the first, if you remember correctly, and you kind of touched on this, the first service to give you the entire season that day and not make you wait. So they kind of introduced, oh my God, I can binge. I can sit here on a Saturday and watch an entire season if I'm crazy enough to do it. And it created this new binge culture, which then just leaves you needing more, right? You're never satisfied, I think, at that point, right? And it just, it allowed it, the ability, also having Netflix, just countless hours of so many titles that I can click on. I haven't seen, let me watch 6 seasons in 1 week. Okay. So I think you're looking at this now, this sort of money is being thrown at this. Therefore, as we talked about it, and now let's talk about, before I go into the recent downfall of show quality, now the approved list of streaming services: Netflix, Max, Apple TV Plus, Hulu, Paramount Plus, Showtime, which is now joined, in case people are wondering, with Paramount Plus, in case you're wondering why Showtime Anytime is not working anymore. FX, AMC, Prime, Disney Plus, and even Peacock. I hate to say it, but even Peacock. Okay. So before I go back into the downfall and why, this was sort of the beginning, but I do want to quickly, now that I've given you this list, the Wally Report only really judges and critiques shows from this list. No regular network shows will ever be introduced. Okay. There's some classic regular network shows that obviously are on my all-time 100 list, but I don't have time for watered down regular network content. We're only talking about the highest quality stuff, right? It doesn't mean that it always has to have critical acclaim, like Cobra Kai, for example, even though it does get hot tomato scores, I know is a bit silly. It's way high on my list. So I'm not saying that everything has to be this amazing drama masterpiece to make the Wally Report list, right? But I just wanted to be clear for listeners out there. I'm sorry, and if there's writers, anybody that you're working in regular network, more power to you. I'm not dissing that at all. I'm just saying it's probably never going to be on our countdown. We're never going to go into reality TV and things like that. Okay, let's talk about this downfall. What has happened? Saturation of shows. There's so many streaming services, there's so many shows now. It's just too much. How do you keep up? And when there's that many titles and that much content, there's no way the genius people that were making all the shows during that time period can come up with that many great shows all the time. Just think about the way I like to compare is think about your favorite band. Eventually they by the third or the fourth or the fifth album, it's never going to be as good as those first couple albums, right? So when you're coming out with a new show weekly, how is it going to be great? Okay, lazy Gen Z binge culture is my other thing that I kind of said that even though I love Netflix and there's a lot of great content on it, it introduced this new era of just binging and then needing the next show and then not really demanding quality, which is the same issue of the film decay that I talked about. Okay, you're just going to the movies, you don't care what it is, you see a preview, it might be funny, let's just go waste money on it. Okay, now we also talked about, and I'll let you interject here, um, writer's strike and COVID. COVID first, let's talk about that. So obviously that production was shut down and for 2020, 2021, even into 2022, there was a major delay. So I think because of that, they didn't have time to maybe, get as much quality stuff. And so they had to rush it later on. There was a big delay and writer's strike, right? So that's been going on this whole past year. And that delayed, in 2023, and that delayed a lot of content that's coming out in 2024. So now what we've kind of come to is this current landscape. I'm dismayed and disheartened by the current landscape of content right now. There still is some good stuff, which we're going to talk about, but I've definitely this is the first time I feel like in the last 10 years that I am constantly without a show and that I'm searching more thoroughly. I used to just be able to click on HBO and boom, there'd be three that I could just count on that would blow my mind. Now I'm like, I have to decipher. So, um, before I go into my next spiel about my top five and what we're going to do, I just wanted to, do you have any interjections also about this recent downfall? Have you noticed over the last 4 or 5 years or so that you had to search much harder to find quality television, or you've had to sift through more things to really get there?
Well, I've noticed, yes, but I've also noticed an interruption in programming as a result of COVID, and then the writer's strike, which has created a situation in which there has now been, in some cases, so much time between seasons that
Mm,
the enthusiasm is lost. Right? You can keep an audience waiting for a certain amount of time, but after that, people forget, and people move on with their lives, or people find a new show to become invested in. So I think that the two are very different in their nature. They had a similar impact, a similar effect. I think COVID is especially interesting because you have these shows that take place now,
mm,
and first of all, they were production was abruptly stopped. In the case of Billions, they decided to release the first, it was like two-thirds of the season. And then when they came back and released the final third of the season, they had to integrate COVID into the storyline because the show takes place now. So it presented not only a production challenge
mm,
and a logistical challenge, but it also presented a narrative challenge to the show itself. Um, but then, of course, the world of any television show moves faster than the real world. So you then have people in TV shows, in Billions, the new Sex in the City, which is called And Just Like That, is another example of this. Uh, they acknowledge that COVID happened. Maybe there are a couple episodes where you see people wearing masks, but then they're no longer wearing masks. So then they are farther into the future than we are. And
Mm,
suddenly there's this very interesting disparity in terms of time. So it challenged production, but it also challenged content. And then with the writer's strike, again, you have something similar where shows are interrupted mid-season. Um, and similar to COVID, no one knew how long that was going to last. And thankfully, uh, they were able to resolve things. I don't know all of the details of the writer's strike, and so I can't really speak to the mechanics of those negotiations. But what I do know is that I have been waiting for season 2 of Severance for what feels like a lifetime, and I've already watched season 1 3 times. So I'm and in the meantime, yeah, I feel like we're in the midst of a bit of a desert, and it's this result of this sort of back to back of COVID and the writer's strike, which happened in this larger matrix of lower production standards to begin with, right? This
right.
lower quality standards to begin with that you were talking about because of this proliferation of content, so many shows, binge culture, etc. So it's kind of a perfect storm, and that's what lands us where we are right now.
Yes, and so I actually like that you brought more insights to the COVID era, because I almost forgot that's another big thing, major delays, and then there was they had to adjust mid season, what was happening. So yeah, that's a good point. So because of this new landscape that we're in, right? Normally, as I outlined early on, the standard show will be me coming in now and telling you my top five. But because I've had such difficulty in 2024, and I know we're all the way in April, right? We're going to go back to 2023 now because I've had to do that. And I'm going to give you my top five. So for the listeners, this is a special episode. I'm going to recap the top five of 2023, give you the reasons why. Okay. Um, and then I'm going to give you some previews for 2024. Our next episode will go into the hottest top five shows of May 2024, which will hopefully be in a couple weeks, right? So, um, two great things that you're going to like. One is we got to talk about Rotten Tomatoes before I get into my list. So, just so the viewer understands, I don't have a tons of time. I'm working nonstop. I have to have some sort of qualification requirement before I just jump into any show. And with the boom of Rotten Tomatoes, I've leaned on them somewhat. I don't agree with we have to actually have a separate episode. I need to really understand their process. I don't always think they're right, but they're rarely wrong. So if something usually has low scores, it's not great. It's a miss. So if there's not 70% on Rotten Tomatoes, I'm probably not watching it unless there's a gun to my head, or unless it's a show I've been anticipating, or it's a theme that I just have to get in. I have to watch it. That I've been anticipating, something like that. But usually, if it's not 70%, it's out. Okay, that's how I can weed out a lot of the poor shows and not waste my time. Right. The other thing that I've developed that I'm unveiling to you now, okay, and to all the listeners, I also have developed my own. It needs to be buttoned up a little bit. I have a new criteria for how I'm ranking my shows. Okay. Now, this will always come into play when I'm giving my top five and our all time shows. Now, again, it needs to be cleaned up a little bit, but this is what we're looking at. So, anytime I look at a piece of television, and you know what? Before I get into this, the one other concept I want to address with you, Mr. Devine, is let's stop calling it television. Okay, before we move on, I think they should just be called series or featured series or premium series or something like that. We're not going Thursday night with the family and sitting down at 7 p.m. and watching Charles in Charge anymore. Okay, this is These are you can watch it anytime you want from different streaming services. I feel like the word television brings a negative connotation. We're not talking about 80s sitcoms. Some are still on TV. Like I still might watch FX, Shogun, for example. I'm recording it from my direct TV. But most of the time, you're going to the app, you're watching it whatever you want. It has nothing to do with a TV schedule or a TV guide or something of that nature. So let's agree on that. I think, that's been something that's been bugging me.
Well, I don't know if
Yeah.
I don't know if I fully agree.
Okay.
I understand the premise, and we're no longer watching this content over the air, right? It's not an over the air broadcast. And even as you said, if it is an over the air broadcast, uh, oftentimes you're recording it, watching it later, rewatching it, whatever. However, the object on which you are watching or consuming this information is a television. And so I think until
But you could
that
say that for film, not to interrupt you. You could say that you're watching a movie on your TV too, right? It's not
you
called a
could, you could,
TV
you could.
movie
I
unless so yeah.
I think that until that changes, until there's a shift in the way that we consume this information, folks will generally continue to call it TV. And whether or not that's right or wrong,
Yeah, yeah.
I do think it's unavoidable in the same way that people still talk about dialing a number on a phone. Well,
Mm.
rotary dials haven't been used on phones in, I don't know, 40 years, 30 years. And now we don't even have buttons that you press. It's just a screen. But nevertheless, people still use the language of dialing a number.
No, I got you, but I'm just thinking maybe even to your point though, think about all the people that now stream on their tablets, on their computers, on their phones. So that
Okay,
could even
fair.
be a better point to me of people, yeah, and listen, you watch movies on your TV again to bring that point up. The only time you call it a TV movie is when it's from TV programming. So I think that's what I'm trying to get is like
I got
against
it.
this is anyway. So good point. So okay, um, here's my new criteria: the overall enjoyment, excitement, and emotional investment of this show. That's big. The acting quality, huge. Writing, this for me is so big, especially dialogue. If I hear great dialogue writing, like a Sorkin style, I'm in. Boom. Camera work, meaning cinematography, editing, action. I have watched a lot of Marvel stuff recently in this drought. And I am like, wow, okay, some really high level, amazing camera work is impressive to me. It doesn't always need to be there, but it could be a bonus. The world creation. Have they created an amazing world that you want to live in? That right? Insightful. Are you learning new things? Now, I like to bring this point up because I do have, sometimes arguments where TV, oh, you're watching, well, how are you wasting that much time in your life? And you're just sitting there watching all these episodes and you're not learning. And I'm like, you know what? Actually, if it's a great show, you are learning things about the world and learning things about different aspects of life and different professions and different type of peoples and cultures. We don't always have the access to fly to Europe anytime we want, so maybe some BBC programming could do the trick. So I'm saying you do get a lot of insights from quality television. The level of how you are dying for the next episode is got to be put in there. Okay. And then the final piece, I would say, is just, and this can be a little bit of a bias, is your overall taste and preference. This can go from person to person. Not everybody likes true crime, right? Not everybody likes action. Not everybody likes horror. So not everybody likes comedy. So that can also shift and this is where I will admit, I might have a different top five than you with your Gilded Age or something like that, because that's a preference that could be your taste, where I might be into the Jinx, but not everybody might want to watch this ridiculous murder, a series. So I think you need to take all those things into account when you're really ranking your shows. Do you like that list? Do you think I hit on some good valid points there? Was there anything missing?
Absolutely. No, no.
Okay,
I
good.
think that's a really comprehensive and very thoughtful way of evaluating shows. And I think again, we should spend more time looking into and talking about the methodology that Rotten Tomatoes uses to evaluate shows. But
Exactly.
I think the point here is that we need a more comprehensive matrix against which we can evaluate shows. And I think what you've built is
Is
exactly
a good
that.
start. And we need to chop it down a little bit. That was just something that was kind of okay. So now we've gone over that new criteria that we're always going to be looking at, right? And so I know that everybody's been waiting for this. I've referenced this a couple times. We're now going to go over that top 5 Wally Report shows of 2023 because remember we don't have 2024 to talk about really. I will give you some teasers later, but we're going to do this here. And I'm also, as I mentioned before, because tomatoes is so important to this, I'm going to be splicing in the tomatoes score as we go along, right? Actually, I gave you a top 7 because I just had such a long list that I couldn't omit some of these, right? So there's a couple consolation prize winners. The number 7 show of 2023 is The Righteous Gemstones, which I know you haven't seen, okay? Uh, but what we're dealing with here is another Danny McBride creation. Now his comedy is a little crude, it's a little childish, it's a little offensive maybe even for some. I mean, I'm sure you watch Eastbound and Down with Kenny Powers. He's obviously a big time movie actor and TV star. He also did Vice Principals, which was pretty darn good. And now to validate myself before I get your interjection here is 100% for season. And I looked up the particular season too. It's not just the overall series. Season 3 is getting 100% on the Tomatoes review score and 88% on the audience score. That's something else that we now need to always look at. Hey, the reviewers might be saying this, but does the audience agree? And it could be in reverse. You're going to see that on this list. So the one thing that I hadn't told you before is now we're on season 3 and John Goodman plays their dad. So let me just describe it for you for a second. It is a dark comedy sort of spoofing the very wealthy religious mega church families of the South. Okay, and remember how I told you it went in my ratings. Is it? Are you learning new things? Are you going into a new world that you might not normally go in or care about? I normally would not care about this type of world, but because it's so captivating and it's so hilarious, you're actually invested in this sort of this new world, right? Learning about what's going on in the background of these mega churches, right? Obviously, it's very satired and it's over the top. Um, but you have amazing acting, actually some really good camera work. Just because it's a comedy doesn't necessarily mean that the editing and the camera work and all that stuff isn't also up there. Some of the other characters are fantastic. The sister is just out of her mind, kind of sort of another comedy genius, if you will. And again, John Goodman, he's just fantastic all the time. Now, I do want to get your interjection here because this is perfectly made for you and other, I think, people living in this culture now. You wait till about 3 seasons have come out, right? And so this could be perfect.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, and I mentioned that earlier on, that one of the reasons that I'm sort of perpetually behind with television shows is because I do like to wait for a few seasons to accumulate. One of the things that I hate doing in life is waiting for anything.
Mm.
And if I am watching a season of a show and there's only one season available and I become really invested in that show, the thought of then waiting for season 2 and then waiting again for season 3 and waiting, it's just so unappealing to me. And moreover, recently I've been burned by this. Severance is a
Mm.
good example, which I brought up before. I did watch season 1 and I've now seen season 1 3 times, and I'm waiting for season 2 to come out. And so, if a show has 3 seasons, that's enough, right? I still don't love the idea of waiting for season 4, but in any case, 3 seasons is enough to sustain me. And the other thing that I didn't realize about this show is that John Goodman is in the show. And to me, you put a good actor in the show, 3 seasons. This is a perfect recipe. So I'm in. It doesn't even matter what it's about. We have a winning recipe here for Christopher Devine.
Yeah, and other people too, because I have heard that come out a lot. Now people are like you; they don't like to be like me in the front lines, waiting week to week, dying for the next episode with anticipation. They need to have a couple seasons to just be able to, if they want to watch two, three in a row, they have that option, right? And I'm with you too. I actually don't love the week to week stuff anymore because right now, with and I'm jumping ahead, but the Jinx season two, we just got the first episode, and now we're like, oh my god, I gotta wait a whole week for episode two. It's killing me. Okay, number 6. I'm also a big sport buff, as you know, and a sport doc junkie. I know you're not a sporting fellow as much as me, right? Um, but the Beckham doc. Oh, and I forgot to tell. Oh, hold on. Not to go back, but I remember I need to tell you networks and providers the same way. So back to Righteous Gemstone, that's HBO Max or just Max now. Okay, so the viewers can follow along with where they need to subscribe, right? Um, Back to Beckham, it's Netflix. Okay, great. I think it's just 3 parts, very well done. You get to learn a lot about his younger life. I didn't know because I'm not a massive European football fan. Of course, I know Beckham from later, and he's a massive star. We all know him, but I didn't really know about. I love the history of things, which I know you do too. And you really get to learn as him a kid, and then his family life, and all these things. Rotten Tomatoes give it 88% review, 95 audience. So that's why I'm saying it is, most audiences are like, wow, it's even higher than Gemstones. It's just such a it really was one of those ones that you couldn't wait to start the next episode. You were definitely major enjoyment, major emotional investment. And so I highly recommend it, for anybody that needs a sports show. Okay, now we're going to get into the real serious top 5 here. Okay, this is where lives are changed. Now, Beef season 1 on Netflix again. Netflix is showing up. They're having a good run here. 98% tomatoes reviewers, 87% audience. So that's a little interesting though. Again, it's a higher with the reviewers, lower on the audience, which is a little bit of a flip. Um, Beef, you haven't seen this one, right? You still haven't
I've not.
watched Beef?
No.
Okay, so for the viewers, what is this? I don't want to give too much away, but it basically is a a drama, but there is some, comical, dark comedy vibes to it, and themes. It basically surrounds a road rage incident between the two main characters. Okay, who you learn through that they're both hotheads, and they get into this incident, and then literally it's the entire season of getting revenge on each other. Sounds a little bit, juvenile if you think about it, but it's very well done. The creators are very intelligent, very smart. The actors are both fantastic. Then the leads in this are just pretty phenomenal. And you're really on the edge of your seat. You're just anticipating what the next one will do. You also get a look, and remember how I talked about, is it insightful? Are you learning new things? Are you being introduced to new worlds? You're kind of immersed in Asian American culture a little bit, sort of, but more modern Asian American culture. And you're kind of seeing family dynamic because, she's much more successful than he is. And you kind of see sort of the interactions of these families and how they sort of treat each other. Um, the Especially the male lead, his brother and cousin are unbelievable characters, and I really recommend it to anybody. It's not perfect the whole way. I had to stop and start a couple times. It was one of those shows where I was like, "Do I like this? Yeah, okay." And then it started hitting me. I then took a little break from it, and then I actually heard it from on another podcast that was highly ranking, and I was like, all right, I'll go back to this, and it ended really strongly. So I gotta say, for any of the listeners, go for it. It's highly ranked, and it's definitely wild. Get ready for a bumpy road.
It's
Does this
just one
intrigue you at
season so
all?
far? Just one
Yes,
season?
yes.
Okay.
Great question. I'm glad you brought that up because we talked about this. And it might just be one perfect season the creator is saying. And I remember in
Oh,
our one
okay.
of our side conversations, you had said that you don't hate that actually.
I
You
love that.
almost don't. Yeah, you might like a one or two season when it's just that, like a um
Queen's
what
Gambit.
am exactly.
Yeah,
Thank
that
you.
is perfect. The extended miniseries, I love it. I think it's great. It solves the problem that you identified previously with film. It allows you to become immersed in this world, but it also solves some of the problems that I've identified in terms of waiting for the next season. And also, it solves another problem that we haven't really talked much about is how many seasons is too many seasons,
Mm,
right? And I don't want to sidetrack you from your list because I'm curious to hear the remaining four. But we do need to talk about this at some point because there have been a couple of shows recently. Billions is a great example that just too many seasons, right?
too
And
many.
they just don't know how to wrap it up. And so I think that's an important consideration as well. If it's a single season, just one perfect season, that problem goes away. So
To
yes,
me, that's light, but not to interject, but to me, that's light. I got to at least have two. I never just want one. And, and we can talk about Queen's Gambit, for example. I know it's a perfect single season, but God, I want more. Godless was another example. It was an amazing Western that came out. It was just one. And there's certain ones that are made for that. I think the sweet spot is between 4 and 5 these days because it's not too long to where you're just running out of ideas and you're bringing up, ridiculous things, right? Um, okay, let's continue on here. Top Boy season 3. Okay, so Netflix again. It was originally a BBC show that came out, I think, a good 10 years ago, even longer, called Top Boy Summer House, and I think there was a lot of following there. In the UK, and then Netflix a couple years ago kind of brought back the show and must have got with those original creators and actors and brought it back. And it's set in London, uh, uh, and it features a lot of the street gangs there. So it's very real. It's very raw. You're on the edge of your seat. And it's not for the faint of heart. I mean, you're just you're tense, and so for the enjoyment uh, factor, you then need to be enjoying that it's tense, right? You just not it's not a walk in the park again, right? So the acting's fantastic, the camera work is amazing, the writing is great. I don't know if I love this new season as much as I did season 1 and 2. And of course, I don't want to do any giveaways. I'm unhappy, I think, with how it ended, but that's just because I get invested in certain characters. And so I have personal feelings and opinions towards that. But I think anybody should watch it. Let's look at Rotten Tomatoes. 92% review, 82, oh no, sorry, 87 audience. So it's almost right in line. They also, and I know you're not a hip hop guy, I don't think. Maybe you're a little classic hip hop, but they have, so there's a in the UK, there's a very popular form of hip hop called grime. Okay, and it's very street and rugged, and they actually have really good beats, and they have amazing music in the soundtrack. So this is great for all the listeners out there that like this type of stuff. Again, taste has something to do with it. It's like it's all about, there's a lot of violence, there's a lot of murder, there's a lot of that kind of thing. And so, okay, let's move on to number 3. Okay. We're getting very hot here now. This is
I'm
very,
ready.
very serious.
I'm ready.
Okay. Daisy Jones and the Six. Okay.
Yes.
Now, this is now to shift gears here. And I think I told you Top Boy was Netflix, Beef was Netflix, Beckham was Netflix. They had 3 in a row. Now, Daisy Jones and the Six, finally, Amazon Prime gets one on the top 7. Okay. Before I go into the show, this is actually interesting. For the one time, I'm going against my own restrictions. The reviewers have listed this as 69%, one below my
Get out of
threshold.
here.
However, the audience has said 82%. So I'm see that's where I'm now coming in. So I think that's where, to me, enjoyment was just emotional investment was amazing. Just acting, writing, everything. And just so people know, this is based on a book, loosely based on the story of Fleetwood Mac. It takes place in the mid 70s. Into the summer of 77, I believe. It also jumps ahead into the 90s, and you see the characters talking about, kind of like almost like a VH1 behind the story, and they're talking about what had happened to them. But I think this one you have to like, because I know you're a classic rock guy. I know you're a Fleetwood Mac guy. If you're not, well, I mean, I think anybody, if you're not a Fleetwood Mac person, that's a problem. But I think just the other big thing is that the lead actress is Elvis's granddaughter, who is very impressive. They play their own music. They can sing, they play their instruments. And I just think emotionally, you're very invested in this. And I really love this time period. My dad was a huge classic rock fan. So I was raised on this type of music. So I think maybe emotionally, and just I romanticize the 60s, 70s, 80s, some of these older decades, if you will. And it's very, very well done. So um, what are your feelings on this? I know you haven't seen it. Would this be something you'd be adding a Divine list?
So a couple of things. First of all, yes, I'm a Fleetwood Mac fan. I've seen them in concert a couple of
Oh,
times. In
okay.
fact, when I was uh, 4 or 5, I saw Stevie Nicks perform with Mick Fleetwood during a period when Fleetwood Mac was not together, and it was sort of this impromptu concert that I got to see. So it's one of my earliest memories, actually, uh, of seeing live music.
Mm.
Um, I I am also a huge classic rock fan. I am a father. My son is 2 years old now, and he and I watch every night videos of Midnight Special, which was a late night live music program. And Midnight Special was different from many of the other programs that were on during the period, because the musicians were actually playing live. So if you saw
Mm.
musicians on Ed Sullivan, The Tonight Show, that sort of thing, they were just lip syncing to pre-recorded music. But on Midnight Special, they were playing live. And just last night, we were watching Fleetwood Mac perform on Midnight Special.
Oh, nice.
And
Okay.
1978, I want to say. 70s. What year did Rumors come out? Do you know off the top of your
I,
head?
I looked it up
77?
when I watched this show because I got
Yeah.
obsessed. I think it's actually that same year. It's 76 or 77, because that's why the book is then sort of loosely based on the success of Rumors.
Yeah.
I will say that, of course, these songs are not as great as the amazing Immaculate Fleetwood Mac songs, but for just having to make new music, there's a couple songs that actually are pretty unbelievable, that they just, they must have had amazing songwriters that were, worked with the creators to come up with this.
So I watched the first half of the first episode of Daisy Jones and the
Okay.
Six. And this is maybe
Okay.
something else that you can help me get over. So when I
Okay.
I started watching this show months ago, shortly after it came out, and I stopped because I really, 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 because when I immerse myself in a world, I really want to become immersed. So I was like, I need to do more research about Fleetwood Mac. I need to
Mm.
read the book. Like, I established this long list of things that I need to do before I watch the show, just to make sure that I'm truly maximizing my enjoyment. Of course, what happened was then I became distracted by something else, and so the show's kind of been it's been eating away at me, that I haven't
Yeah.
seen it, and I need to just watch it. That's what I need to do. I just need to sit down and watch it. But I felt, when I started watching it, I felt unprepared. I felt the need to do additional research, academic research,
Yeah.
before
Yeah.
before delving into this world.
Gotcha. Well, I think for anybody listening, it's definitely worth a watch. It was very impressive. It's on a lot of other people's on the watch. They was on their top 10 list as well. Okay, so now we're on the top two here. Okay. I think most people are going to have these as one and two. Anybody, I think, in this realm is probably going to go this way. Number two of 2023 was Succession season 4, the final season. Okay. 97% audience, reviewers score, 87% audience. So actually, it's more getting the critical acclaim, I think, from the reviewers. But also obviously very high. 87 is very high from the audience. I will say that um, for people who haven't seen this, it's some of the best dialogue writing ever on TV. It is, yeah, overall, the show is very well made. Acting's great. The writing's fantastic. Just, the overall whoever created all of this is just, could be considered a genius. Um, it's the first, this is the weird thing about Succession. Someone had the balls to say, we don't need a hero. You're going to maybe dislike everybody on the show, except maybe Tom and cousin Greg. And even them over time, you kind of don't love them either. But I almost like it because they had the balls to do that. It's based on the Murdoch family, and so they didn't need to have one character that you love and everybody else you dislike. It really ebbs and flows, and sometimes you like the second eldest son that you're sort of feeling bad for because he's trying to take over. You've seen, sorry, let's before I continue on. You've seen some seasons, correct?
I have, yeah, but I haven't seen the third or fourth season. It's interesting though. I'm glad you brought up the dialogue because I read an article recently. It wasn't even an article. It was some chat online. It was Reddit or something.
Yeah.
Uh, Comparing where people were arguing about Billions compared with Succession. And there
Mm.
was one post that like sort of beautifully summarized and distilled what makes Succession in this person's mind superior to Billions. For me, the jury is still out, but they said it all comes down to the dialogue, and that in Billions you have these sort of long soliloquies delivered by Paul Giamatti, and they're fun to watch, but no one talks like that. And in Succession, there's naturalistic dialogue that perfectly captures the way that people actually communicate.
And that's a
Would
good
you say that's
point.
a fair
Yeah,
characterization?
I could go down this whole. I don't want to go down a whole Billions. I think
No, that's fine.
yes, yeah, but no, no, no. It's a great point. I'm just saying. So yes, Billions kind of overdoes
I know
it with these
you get upset
great.
about Billions when we talk about the
Yeah,
writing.
well,
I
for a
know.
first season, I thought was fantastic, but this is a great point though. I think you made this is much more. Even though some I think is over the top in Succession as two, it's way more intelligent and actually how people talk.
Yep.
Yes, and so that part I say just like I will say that they made it for me a couple mistakes early on in season 4. I still put it as my number 2 show of the year just because of all the qualities that it does give you, and it was one of the last great shows that we were all watching from HBO right now before sort of the Sahara of shows. And now people are kind of saying, oh God, without Succession, what do we do? I do think like it's not on my all time list. Like, let's just be clear. It's number 2 because it's number 2 of 2023. If this goes to my all time list, we're talking 20, top 30, but it's still a phenomenal show, and anybody who hasn't seen it has to it goes all the way to the end. They just do a fantastic job. Okay, so now drum roll, the number 1 show of 2023 on the Wally Report is pretty obvious. It's on a lot of other people's number ones. It's either number 1 or number 2, is the second season of The Bear. Okay. And I know you haven't watched this yet either. I'll get into it in a second, but let's look at these tomato scores. 99% on the tomatoes for the reviewers and 93 for audience. So most of what I'm going over here is agreed by all the critics and all the audience, right? So why do I love this show? Let's talk about, so it's just very real, it's very raw. It's all about, and I don't want to give too much away, but sort of they're from Chicago. um, One of the sons of this family has gone on to sort of work in fine dining and Michelin star, restaurants, right? And he comes back to town to try to sort of save his brother's sandwich shop, and it's just a whole different world, and everybody's just yelling and screaming. It's very, like, all the side characters are unbelievable. The acting's amazing. It's really almost unparalleled right now. The drama is there. You're immersed in this amazing world that you're like, oh wow, I kind of want to be there for a long period of time. I gotta say, it really is rough though. This is what I've been kind of doing. The analogy is, it's kind of like regular life, where not every day is great. Not every episode you're going to be like Breaking Bad, where it's award winning in every episode. Okay, you're going to kind of go through a couple episodes where you're just sort of like, what's going on here? Why am I watching this? Am I enjoying this, or just yelling at each other? What is happening? But there's always a payoff. It's just like, sometimes Wednesdays and Thursdays are rough to get you to your Friday and to get you to your Saturday, right? And that amazing enjoyment. So they make you work for it. So when the great things happen, it's even more amazing and life changing for you. Now, I will say, as you get into season 2, it started off kind of like, what are they doing, in my eyes? Then midway through season 2, there's a couple episodes that are just phenomenal, with the filmmaking, with the acting, just the storytelling. Everything is there. And then I gotta say, it ends with of maybe the final 2 episodes of the season are some of the finest episodes I've ever seen in TV history, and that's saying a lot from me. It's not already on my top all-time 10 list because there's only been 2 seasons. You need to have a little bit more, but it's already up in that top 30 all-time echelon, only 2 seasons in. And the new season, we're counting down the days. They're saying June. So you haven't watched any of this yet, correct?
None of it. None of it. But as
Okay.
soon as season 3 comes out, it's a candidate.
Okay, good. And so the other thing for viewers is, you really get, if you, I mean, I don't have to be a foodie. I'm not a huge master chef myself. I don't watch cooking shows. I'm not obsessed with kitchens. But again, it's a new world. You're getting insights. You're seeing what's going on, and they make it very interesting. So you don't need to be a restaurant enthusiast to love this show. And that's why I think that's why I think it's like, we're always looking for something that's the similar formula that we all know and love, but in a new setting. We like newness. We don't want to just watch the same things over and over and over again. Maybe formulas and themes. But so this is just really cool. It just puts you in um, this world here, right? So that's our top 5 or top 7 people. And I definitely, I know we're going to talk about this at the end, but definitely I want to have, you can make comments on Spotify. So definitely, if you disagree with me, let us know. If you agree, let us know. If there's anything we're omitting, let us know. And I can always watch and throw on the list. Now, before we close this out and just talk about movies again, kind of coming full circle, um, you had 2 shows on the Christopher 2023, or maybe list, Severance and The Gilded Age. You don't need to go too deep into it, but I listen. Let me just tell you, and then I'll let you do your Severance thing. I tried one, and I think 1.5 episodes. I liked it. It was just so strange and off-putting, and it just made me feel uncomfortable. And like, that's part of it. I have to have the enjoyment, and that's part of my criteria. And it could just be my taste. I know it's getting hot tomatoes. I'd have to look it up, but I know it's in the 90 something percentile. So I know other people are agreeing with you, but I just couldn't do it. But I'm going to open the floor to you on why Severance.
So first, yes, folks will have an opportunity to comment, and if you've omitted shows from your top 5 or top 7, I hope that people will let you know. I'm going to be the first person to comment, because I feel that you've neglected 2 shows, and the first is Severance. Look, I get it; it's a little weird. However, I think that it merits more than one episode to
Hmm.
really fully assess. And what I find so compelling, and what I found so compelling about Severance, even from the very first episode, was the immaculate art direction. So it takes place in this sort of dystopian universe, but it adopts, at least in their workspace, there's this sort of very kind of, on the one hand, minimalist, but on the other hand, this sort of like very interesting mid-century
Mm.
vibe. It is filmed at the Old Bell Laboratories, which was designed by Eero Saarinen, and famous Finnish American architect who also designed the St. Louis Arch. And that um, art direction is what allows me to immediately buy into a storyline that is admittedly very odd. It is a very odd storyline. Um, and again, it's sort of, there's a science fiction component to it. It incorporates this kind of dystopian universe, but I didn't. My disbelief is willingly suspended when I see such a beautifully curated and well art directed program. And Severance is exactly that. And it's got Adam Scott, who's
Yeah, who I
wonderful,
like. Of course,
and
he's
Christopher
fantastic.
Walken, and John Turturro. So it's a really excellent cast, and I think that the writing is really great. So I encourage you to give it a second shot and just sort of try and get beyond the subject itself and find another point of entry.
Yeah, no, I'm gonna go back to it. It's back on my list. Okay, so let's end this. Let's end here with another sort of my final insight of the day, right? Where um, I sort of talked about how there had been a decline of movie quality in the 2010 to 2015 span. And then later, I said after the golden age, now there's a decline in TV quality. What's sort of been interesting to me is that there's been a little bit, and I won't say it's a full shift, but there's been some, now that there's Netflix, now that there's Hulu, other providers and other streaming services, if you will, that are making film. There's a little bit of a comeback of some films I really enjoyed that I just wanted to throw out there for the audience. The Killer and The Reptile were both amazing thrillers that were on Netflix. Okay, so if anybody, and the way I look at it, they're both about 2 hours. That's two episodes, right? So, boom, boom. I would like more, but they were both on the edge of your seat. In the Reptile, it's Benicio del Toro, Justin Timberlake's in it. He actually does a pretty decent job. Um, the Killer is Michael Fassbender. I liked The Killer even more. It gave me a sort of a Dexter feeling, mixed with almost a James Bond. He's a hitman, and I don't want to give too much away, but fantastically done. And I wonder if maybe now we're going to see a little bit of because there's this oversaturation of shows. Maybe there's going to be people that are just, what, let's go back to getting the quality back in some films, right? Especially because maybe you don't have to go through the same studios that you always did, or make sure that it is movie theater worthy. It is made Netflix for watching at home, right? So that's a whole new change, something we need to keep our eye on. So for all the listeners, I say check those out. Now I want to end here too with some upcoming things to get excited for. So when you come back for the May episode, you'll be buzzing. So some other shows that I have been taking note of. Griselda on Netflix is actually pretty fantastic. We'll review that next episode. The Patriots doc on Apple TV Plus, I've enjoyed. I don't like it as much as the old Tom Brady doc, but it's pretty decent. Um, Curb season 12. I don't think it's as great as the old seasons. I'm sorry, Larry, but it's still the number one comedy of all time. So don't worry. And there's still some great moments. Shogun on FX, I don't love it as much as other people are saying. It's getting like 100% on the Rotten Tomatoes. A lot of people are watching it. And so it's definitely something people should check out. We will review probably on the next episode. And then some other things to, oh, Jinx season 2. This is the one that I am into. We'll get into it on the next episode. It's more of the story is just so crazy. It just premiered last week, and we're waiting for episode 2 to come out. And then the ones to look ahead is The Bear season 3 in June, and The Boys season 4 on Prime. Um, also in June. So these are going to be some things right around the corner that we will review. So I think with that, I'm going to let Christopher end. Since you're our PR guy, you're our marketing guy. I'm going to let you take it away.
Yeah, absolutely. So, thank you to everyone who joined us for the first episode of the Wally Report, which is the hottest entertainment podcast in the world. We'd love to hear from you. Please comment, like, subscribe, blast, and tell your friends to listen. You can also follow us on Instagram at The Wally Report. And if you'd like to drop us a line, our email address is info@wally.report. No .com, just info@wally.report. How clean is that?
Super
That's the,
clean. Thank you,
that's the
Christopher.
cleanest email address.
Yes, very clean. And we again, I just want to thank everybody for listening. We're going to end with our world famous theme song.